Hi, this is Chris Potter. The topic of this video is intonation. Now intonation is a huge subject and we can't possibly cover it all, but at least I want to get you started thinking about how to play better in tune with yourself and then hopefully better in tune with your flute ensemble, your pianist, with whoever. So the first thing you've got to do is get an electronic tuner. Now, they're not very expensive. It's about $21. Flute World, Carolyn Nussbaum's Flute Specialist, Flute Pro Shop, all these places have a tuner. And the tuner is going to become your friend. So when you get your tuner, the first thing you're going to try is to play just one single note and see if you can hold it in tune. And it sounds like that would be easy, but it isn't. You will discover that as you're playing that there are these little surges in the air that you seem to have no control over, and those surges are making you go sharp and flat and sharp and flat. The unit of measure we use is called cents, C-E-N-T-S, and in a half step there are 50 cents. Now if you have a fluctuation of a total of 5 cents, that's not too bad, that's okay. So that'd be like from -2.5 to +2.5. But if you have a fluctuation of +5 and -5, we can hear that, and that's not going to work. So you've got to find a way to get the air coming out in a very controlled and steady manner. And the usual culprit is the throat. The throat is having little contractions in it, and it's making the passageway a little bit smaller and then a little bit bigger again, and it's making the air do that surge that you're seeing evidence of on the tuner. The more you can relax and open your throat, the more likely you will be to have this nice calm stream of air coming out, and your tone is going to be better also. So you've got your tuner, you're practicing just this one note, like G above the staff. That would be a good note to try, and just see if you can keep it right at 0. Again, that's harder than it sounds. The next thing that you want to do, and something that I have found very useful at my alto and bass flute retreats, is to map your flute. And what this entails is that you recruit somebody to help you, and they have the tuner, and they're going to be calling out at random the names of notes that the flute plays, and they're going to mark down on a chart whether you're flat or you're sharp and how flat or sharp you are. So I have a book actually called 7 Steps to Better Intonation. Might be a little bit hard to see, but there's a chart on the first page. It's step 1. There's a line in the middle which is in tune, and then every note of the flute is across the top, and they make a little mark at the intersection of whether you're sharp or flat on that note. And you end up with this wonderfully interesting little zigzag sort of chart, but it gives you terrific information about what you and your flute are doing at this moment in time. So that's a very helpful and useful piece of information to uncover about you and your instrument. The second step, which is also in my book, the second of the 7 steps, is to play that same G, mezzo forte and diminuendo to piano, and keep it in tune. And again, it seems like this should be easy to do, but you'll discover that it's not so easy. In order to play softly, we send up less air. If that air slows down, you're going to go flat. So our challenge is to make less air go the same speed as when we were mezzo forte. And the way we accomplish that is by making the opening and the lips smaller. Conversely, if you're practicing on going from, say, mezzo piano to forte, you don't want to go sharp, and so we have to open up. So like the aperture of a camera, the opening size in the lips is constantly adjusting for the amount of air that's coming through it, and that's how some people seem to play in tune so easily, because they figured out how to do that. So that's going to take a little bit of practice on your part. Now, something of a slightly more practical nature, which is also dealt with as one of the steps in my book, is how am I doing in this piece of music? I seem to be having trouble with this piece of music. What's going on? So you get out your tuner, you get out your piece of music, and you check the first note in every measure and just see, am I in tune on this note? Next measure, am I in tune on that note? And it's a very methodical and very easily structured way to get through a piece and see if you're in tune. Another more musical way to work on this is to identify phrases in the piece and check the first note, the highest note, and then the last note. And so you've got sort of the skeleton of the phrase there, and you want to make sure that that skeleton is in tune. Usually what happens is that the first note, which is usually a little bit on the soft side, is a little bit flat. Then you get to the highest note and the loudest note, and it tends to be sharp. And then you get to the last note, and you're running out of air by this point, so it's really flat. So we're trying to get the balance so that we don't have such wide fluctuations in pitch. So that's a very important thing in whatever ensemble you're playing with. A piano can't go flat and sharp with you. Other instruments can, but they don't necessarily want to. Now, tuning procedures. If you're in a flute ensemble, you want to make sure that your instrument is at performance temperature before you tune. The flute, obviously, bass flute's fairly large. It takes a little bit longer for it to get warmed up. If it's cold, it's going to be flat, and you would rather be at performance temperature when you tune it. You already want to know, before the conductor even starts the tuning routine, you want to know that you are already at A440. So because you have your tuner, you've already tuned, and that's going to make that whole process easier. You're not going to be sitting there going, oh my God, what am I, flat, sharp? I don't even know. Now, the problem with tuning in an ensemble is that it's not quite as useful as you might think it is. There are two main scenarios that happen when you're tuning in a group. One is that there's a designated person who gives the tuning note, and everybody then tries to match that person's pitch. Now, what often happens is that unconsciously people want to hear themselves a little bit when they're tuning, and what that usually means is that we're a little bit sharper than the actual tuning note. Now, if I tune a little bit sharper, the person who's sitting next to me wants to hear themselves too, so they tune a little bit sharper than I am, and then the person next to them is a little bit sharper, and so you can see that things begin to escalate. So the other scenario is that the conductor comes around with a tuner and shows it to everybody, and they're playing their note and they're tuning. The problem is that if you're looking up at that tuner and you're playing your note up here and you're tuning, and then when you actually play, you're down here, the note is flatter. So if everyone were to be lowering their head the same amount as you, we would all be flat together, but you know that's not going to happen. A better scenario would be to put that tuner down in front of the music on the music stand, so at least you would have some kind of more accurate representation of what you're going to do. The best thing that I've actually found is when I'm tuning, I'm doing this all independently, I look at the first piece that we're going to work on, and I find a note that's 2 or 3 measures in on the first piece that we're going to work on, and I'm going to pick a note that's representative of the octave in which I'm playing most of this piece, and more critically yet, representative of the dynamic level that I'm playing most of the time in the piece. If you've got a really soft, low piece, you don't want to tune at mezzo forte, you want to tune at piano, because you're going to be struggling less. It's really difficult to lift the pitch of the very bottom notes of the bass flute up. So you have to decide where you're going to fight your battles, as it were. So I hope that gave you some ideas. Now, third octave. Sometimes composers write in the third octave for the bass flute, and you think, why? But they did. So the notes up there are all about a quarter step sharp, and the reason that they're quarter step sharp is because manufacturers have not yet figured out how to make a continuous taper from the head joint through the curve and into the body. If you look at your C flute, you will notice that the end with the little crown is smaller around than where the head joint goes into the body. There's a continuous taper, and they discovered years ago that that's what had to happen in order for the registers to be the best in tune with themselves. They can't do that yet on the bass and on the curved alto, so all the notes up there are quarter step sharp. But there are solutions, of course. So the general rule is, if you close keys, you lower pitch. If you open keys, you raise pitch. So just keeping that in mind, you can find some alternate fingerings for yourself. Here are just a couple of them. Here's the D above the staff, and what I found is that all I really need to do is to raise the little finger, and that's usually enough to get the pitch in. So I'll play it with and without that key. You can hear that lowers the pitch. The E flat just above that, here's the regular fingering. If I leave off the E flat key, you can hear that significantly lowers the pitch. I can also play the high E flat without the A flat key. And I can play that E flat by fingering the C and adding two trill keys. That's a different kind of sound altogether. Now in my book, the Alto and Bass Flute Resource Book, which is published by Falls House Press, as was the 7 Steps to Better Intonation, I have 2.5 pages of fingerings for notes in the 3rd octave, and there are usually several suggestions for each note, depending on what note you're coming from. You can sometimes get to a fingering, sometimes you can't get to a fingering. If you're playing something really loud, you want a flatter fingering than if you're just a little bit loud. So both of these books and the tuners are all available from Flute World, Carolyn Nussbaum's Flute Specialists, and the Flute Pro Shop. Thank you very much.